Have you ever asked yourself this question? Why do my relationships always end the same way? The names change, the faces change, the circumstances change, but the story, the emotional arc, the specific shape of the disappointment, the particular way things fall apart remains almost exactly the same. Different person, different beginning, different details, same ending. Most people, when they notice this pattern, reach for the obvious explanation: bad luck, a string of coincidences, the unfortunate reality that the world contains a disproportionate number of people who are simply wrong for them. They search, with increasing frustration and decreasing hope, for the explanation that locates the problem outside themselves in the inadequacy of their partners, the cruelty of circumstance, the specific difficulty of finding, in a complicated world, someone who is genuinely capable of meeting them well. This explanation is understandable. It is also, according to Carl Jung, almost entirely wrong. Jung's central insight about repeating patterns in relationships is one of the most important and most consistently resisted ideas in the entire history of depth psychology. It is this: nothing that repeats in your external world is actually about the external world. Everything that repeats is a reflection of your internal world. The people you are drawn to, the dynamics you recreate, the specific emotional textures of your most significant relationships, these are not random selections from the world's available population. They are the external expression of something internal, something that has not yet been seen, clearly acknowledged, honestly, or integrated consciously. The problem is not in the people you have been choosing. The problem is in something about yourself that you have not yet noticed. That is not a comfortable message, but it is, when genuinely received and genuinely engaged with, one of the most liberating messages available. Because if the pattern originates in you, then the power to change the pattern also resides in you, not in finding a different person, not in waiting for the world to offer better options, in the specific, demanding, entirely possible work of understanding yourself more honestly. 5 dimensions of that work. 5 Jung-informed explanations for why the same story keeps being written and what it takes to finally write a different one. 1. Until you know your shadow, you will keep choosing the same people. Every human being carries within them qualities they cannot acknowledge, not because those qualities are extraordinary or uniquely shameful, but because at some point in childhood, in formative experiences, in the ongoing process of adapting to the social world's requirements, those qualities were judged unacceptable, too much, too dark, too incompatible with the person you needed to be in order to be loved and accepted, and so they were pushed down, not eliminated. The psyche does not eliminate what it cannot integrate, it simply relocates it. These rejected qualities, the jealousy you deny, the anger you suppress, the neediness you are ashamed of, the profound sense of unworthiness you have never allowed yourself to fully examine, sink below the surface of conscious awareness and become what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not evil, it is not the worst of you, it is simply the unacknowledged part of you, the repository of everything that did not make the cut for the conscious self-image, and it does not disappear simply because you refuse to look at it. It continues to operate from its position below the surface, with considerable influence over your behavior, your choices, and your attractions. Here is the mechanism that produces the repeating pattern. When you consistently reject certain qualities in yourself, when you maintain, with some psychological investment, that you are not jealous or not angry or not needy or not afraid, those rejected qualities do not simply disappear from your psychological world. They reappear in the people you are drawn to. Jung called this projection the unconscious process by which the unacknowledged contents of your own psyche are perceived as belonging to someone else. The person who cannot acknowledge their own rage will consistently encounter people they experience as inexplicably, almost magnetically drawn to rage, as though life is conspiring to put angry people in their path. The person who cannot acknowledge their own neediness will find themselves consistently in relationships with people who seem extraordinarily needy. The person who cannot acknowledge their own capacity for cruelty will be consistently bewildered by the cruelty they encounter. In those they love, they are not encountering these things because the world is maliciously arranged to confront them with their rejected qualities. They are encountering these things because the psyche, with its own impersonal efficiency, is drawn to what it has not resolved and continues to recreate in the external world. The opportunity to finally encounter and integrate what it has been refusing to acknowledge internally. The people who hurt you most deeply are not in this framework, primarily evidence of the world's cruelty or your bad luck. They are, at a level that is difficult to accept and impossible to dismiss once genuinely seen, representations of the parts of yourself you have most consistently refused to meet, until you turn toward your shadow, not with self-condemnation, not with the drama of self-discovery, but with the honest, patient willingness to acknowledge what you actually carry. You will continue to meet it outside, in the same kinds of people, generating the same kinds of pain, enacting the same story that will not stop repeating until its internal source has been genuinely acknowledged. Asterisk, quick reminder, if this video helps or inspires you, don't forget to like. 2. Familiar pain feels safer than unknown happiness. The mind is not primarily a rational instrument. We prefer to believe it is that it selects, from the available options, the one most likely to produce well-being and satisfaction. But the actual evidence of human behavior, examined honestly, suggests something considerably more complicated and considerably more interesting. The mind selects what is familiar, not what is good, not what is nourishing, not what is genuinely likely to produce the outcomes we consciously say we want. What the mind selects, with a consistency that overrides conscious preference in the most important decisions of most people's lives, is what feels like home. And home is not defined by what is healthy. Home is defined by what is known. If you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where warmth arrived intermittently, unpredictably, in ways that required continuous monitoring and continuous effort to secure your nervous system, learn to code that dynamic as normal. Not good, not desirable, normal, the baseline against which all subsequent relational experiences are measured. And when you encounter, as an adult, a relationship that operates by a different logic, where warmth is consistent, where acceptance is not earned through performance, where the other person's feelings about you are not a mystery requiring constant management, the nervous system does not necessarily respond with relief. It often responds with unease, with the specific discomfort of being in unfamiliar territory, with a restlessness that looks, from inside the experience, like loss of interest or incompatibility. Meanwhile, the person who treats you the way you were treated in the formative relational environment of your past, the one whose emotional availability fluctuates in the specific rhythm that your nervous system learned to call love, whose regard must be earned in the specific ways your childhood taught you to earn it. That person feels, against all rational assessment, like home, like the real thing, like the connection you were looking for. This is not stupidity. It is not weakness. It is the entirely predictable consequence of a nervous system doing what nervous systems do, recognizing patterns, generating familiarity responses, and directing you toward what it knows how to navigate, even when what it knows how to navigate is not what you consciously want, and not what is actually good for you. The familiar pain is not comfortable, but it is known, and known, to the nervous system, means survivable. Unknown happiness, however genuinely good it might be, carries the specific anxiety of unfamiliar territory. What if I don't know how to be in this? What if it doesn't last? What if it turns out not to be real? These questions, arising from the nervous system's orientation toward the known, produce a pullback toward the familiar that is experienced not as a choice but as a feeling, the feeling of genuine connection, of real chemistry, of finally finding the person who gets it. But it is, very often, something considerably more mechanical than that, the recognition of a pattern the nervous system already knows. Changing this requires more than the decision to choose better. It requires the specific, neurologically grounded work of actually expanding what feels normal, of sitting with the discomfort of genuine goodness long enough for the nervous system to begin, slowly and with considerable resistance, to recode it as something other than threat. 3. You try to complete yourself through another person. There is a story about romantic love that is so deeply embedded in the cultural imagination that most people never examine it as a story at all. It is the story of the missing half, the idea that somewhere in the world there is a person who is exactly the complement of your incompleteness, whose presence will resolve the specific ache of whatever you have always felt was missing, whose love will finally make you whole. This story is not merely romantic. It is psychologically operative in the lives of most people, not as a consciously held belief, but as an unconscious organizing principle of how they approach intimate relationship. The relationship entered not as a connection between two already whole people, but as the solution to an internal deficiency. The partner sought not as a companion on a shared journey, but as the provider of the specific qualities: security, validation, excitement, purpose, the sense of being chosen and therefore worthy that feel absent from the self. Jung understood this dynamic, and he was characteristically direct about its consequences. When you enter a relationship primarily to receive from it what you cannot provide for yourself, when the relationship's primary function is the completion of an internal lack, what you have created is not intimacy. What you have created is dependency, and dependency, however it presents in its early stages, generates a specific and entirely predictable relational arc. In the beginning, the dependency feels like love. The intensity of it, the relief of encountering someone who seems to offer what has always been missing, the euphoria of finally feeling complete, is real and powerful, and easily mistaken for the genuine article. But dependency is not the same as love, however much it resembles it in its early presentation. Love is the connection between two people who are genuinely present to each other. Dependency is the attachment to someone as the source of something you need, which means that the relationship is fundamentally about the need rather than about the person. And needs, unexamined, do not remain stable. They escalate. What was initially satisfying becomes the new baseline, and the baseline always eventually requires more. The specific quality of reassurance or validation or security that the other person was providing begins to feel insufficient, not because they have changed, but because the internal lack it was temporarily addressing has not actually been resolved. It has simply been covered. This is the origin of the control dynamic that appears in so very many relationships, the escalating attempt to secure from the other person the continuous supply of whatever it is that the relationship was built to provide. And control, in relationships, always produces exactly what it was trying to prevent: the withdrawal of the other person's genuine presence. As the human soul, which does not thrive under management, begins to protect itself from a relationship it increasingly experiences as a demand rather than a connection. The connection you cannot build with yourself. You cannot build healthily with anyone else. This is not a counsel of self-sufficiency that excludes genuine intimacy. It is the recognition that genuine intimacy, the kind worth having, the kind that actually nourishes rather than depletes, is only possible between two people who are each, in some meaningful sense, already home in themselves, who are present to each other, not from the anxiety of need, but from the genuine desire for encounter. The work of becoming whole enough to love well is the most important relational work available, and it is entirely and only work you can do alone. 4. You mistake what you project for what is real. When you fall in love with someone, are you actually seeing them? This is not a rhetorical question. Jung's concept of projection gives it a very specific and very important answer. Probably not entirely, and possibly not primarily. What happens in the early stages of romantic attraction from a Jungian perspective is not simply the perception of qualities that the other person actually possesses. It is the encounter with a person who provides a sufficiently compelling canvas for the projection of your own inner images, the ideals you carry within you and have not yet integrated, the qualities you admire and have not yet developed in yourself. The figure, what Jung called the anima or animus, the inner image of the idealized other that your psyche has been constructing from the materials of your own history, desire, and imagination. You do not fall in love with the person. You fall in love with the projection you have placed on the person, and the person, for a time, appears to confirm the projection, because human beings are, in the early stages of romantic connection, presenting their most appealing selves, and because the unconscious mind is extraordinarily good at finding, in the actual person, the specific evidence that confirms what it has already decided to believe. This is why falling in love feels the way it does. The intensity, the certainty, the sense of finally encountering someone who is exactly what you were looking for. These experiences are real, but their object is partially internal. What you are responding to is partly the actual person, and partly the figure your own psyche has cast them to play. And then time passes. The projection begins to thin. The actual person with their actual qualities, their actual limitations, their actual way of being in the world becomes increasingly visible beneath the image that was initially superimposed on them. And the experience of this process is, for most people, the experience of disappointment, of betrayal, of the specific bewilderment of saying, they changed. They are not who I thought they were, but they did not change. Your projection dissolved, as projections always eventually do. when the reality of actual sustained contact with the actual person becomes impossible to maintain the illusion against. What changed is not them. What changed is the meaning you were superimposing on them, which could only be maintained as long as you were responding to the projection rather than to the person. This does not mean that love is impossible, or that genuine connection does not exist. It means that the kind of love that is sustainable, that remains alive and nourishing and real after the projection has dissolved, is the kind that was interested in the actual person all along. That developed as the projection thinned, not into disappointment, but into a deeper and more honest encounter with who was actually there. Getting to that kind of love requires the willingness to become conscious of what you are projecting, to ask, when the intensity is at its highest, not only what you feel but what you might be adding to what is actually present, to develop the specific capacity for honest perception that allows you to see another person as they actually are, rather than as the role you need them to play. 5. You cannot recognize the right person until you know yourself. Most people, when they think about the problem of relationships, frame it as a search problem. The right person is out there, the task is to find them, and the effort goes into the search, the evaluation of candidates, the assessment of compatibility, the increasingly sophisticated filtering of options in pursuit of the one who will finally be the right match. Jung would reframe this entirely. The question is not whether the right person is out there. The question is whether you are the right person. Not morally, not whether you are good enough or worthy enough, but psychologically, whether you know yourself clearly enough to recognize what you actually need, what you actually value, what you are actually capable of offering, and what you cannot yet offer because the internal work has not yet been done. If your own boundaries are unclear to you, if you have not done the work of identifying, from genuine self-knowledge rather than from anxiety or habit, what you will accept and what you will not, then you cannot evaluate what others are offering you with any real accuracy, because the evaluation requires a standard, and the standard can only come from genuine self-knowledge. If your own values are unexamined, if you have not distinguished between what you genuinely value and what you have been told to value, between what actually matters to you and what you perform mattering because it is expected, then you cannot reliably identify alignment or misalignment in the people you encounter, because you do not yet have a clear enough picture of what alignment would look like for you specifically. If you do not know what your own relational patterns are, where your neediness arises, what triggers your specific defenses, what you do when you feel threatened or abandoned or criticized, then you cannot bring honest awareness to the dynamics you are creating in your relationships. You will keep experiencing the pattern as something that is happening to you, rather than something you are participating in creating. Knowing yourself is not a romantic project. It is not about uncovering some essential, perfect, true self that has been hidden by circumstances. It is the ongoing, often uncomfortable, always incomplete work of honest self-observation, of watching your own patterns with the same quality of attention you bring to others, of asking, when things go wrong, not only what the other person did, but what you contributed, of becoming, gradually, more honest about the distance between who you are and who you would like to be. This work does not make you perfect. It does not guarantee that you will never again choose someone who is wrong for you. It does not protect you from the ordinary difficulties and disappointments that are simply part of the human experience of love. But it does something that nothing else can do. It gives you a compass. And a person with a compass does not keep walking in circles, not because the terrain has changed, but because they can finally tell which direction is which. The repeating pattern is not a verdict on your worth. It is not evidence of some irreparable flaw or some fundamental incapacity for genuine connection. It is simply what Jung would recognize as the ordinary, impersonal operation of the unconscious, the psyche recreating, in the external world, what has not yet been resolved in the internal one. And here is the genuinely hopeful thing about that recognition. The unconscious is not your enemy. It is not trying to punish you. It is doing the only thing it knows how to do with unresolved material. It is presenting it, again and again, in slightly different costumes, waiting for the moment when you finally turn toward it with sufficient honesty and sufficient courage to see what is actually there. That moment, the moment of genuine recognition, of turning toward the pattern rather than away from it, is the moment the cycle begins to break. Not because the recognition instantly changes everything. The work that follows recognition is real work, and it takes real time, but because nothing changes before it is seen, and what has been genuinely seen, by a consciousness that is willing to hold what it has seen without flinching, has already begun its transformation. The question that has been driving the search, why do I keep finding the wrong people, is not quite the right question. The right question is the one that turns the search inward. Why do I keep writing the same story? And the follow-up, which carries within it everything that is needed. What would I need to understand about myself to finally write a different one? That question, asked honestly and pursued genuinely, is the beginning of everything. The pattern is not your destiny. It is your invitation